Jake's here.
Or
He's in the building.
he's in the building. I suspect Karen is too. I need to watch these because I see it more and more where they charge the same price, but the weight changes, it gets a little smaller. Graham crackers got smaller.
Maybe you're just getting bigger.
Yeah.
Like when you go back to see things that you saw as a child and they're so much smaller,
Yeah,
you know, in your school and things. So maybe you're just getting bigger.
The Oreos are shrinking in diameter too.
yeah, I wish that were the case, but see what, and this been going on, for a while. The same thing with, my wife is a comparison shopper. And so she noticed that the things at Walmart, if you buy sheets there, the thread count is lower than other stores. And so that's why they're cheaper,
Right.
but everyone thinks they're getting a great
You're
deal.
getting the deal.
But I've noticed, you know, on shirts and pants, casual pants that I wear, I go back now and buy some to replace them. And man, the quality is significantly lower for the same thing. It looks like it's time. So we're recording. Good afternoon. We welcome you all here to our study meeting of the West Valley City Council. We have a full quorum. Everybody's participating. So with that then, let's get on to our agenda. Here is the approval of the minutes of November 9th.
I move for approval of those minutes.
Second.
Properly before us. Not hearing any further comments, then without objection, the minutes will be approved. There's no objection, so that's unanimous. So first on our agenda, of course, is a review of our, if we need to, of anything on our agenda for later tonight. All of you saw, I'm sure, the information. We got the official numbers. And so we'll be dealing with those. So I guess that's technically a change. Any questions on that? Now, let's see, when we meet as a board of canvassers, we have to change it, the meeting, or is it, we just do that in the meeting?
We just do it in the meeting, sir,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah, I could, it's been 2 years, so. All right. Well, if nothing there, then let's get started with our first public hearing that we will deal with next week. This is application GPZ-14-2021 filed by Brad Reynolds. It's and when we deal with it, we will consider ordinance 21-63, ordinance 21-64, resolution 21-189. This is the traditional change of the general plan, zoning change and development agreement. This is for property at 3554 South, 3200 West. And so, Mr. Pastrick, it looks like he was standing up, and so I assume he's anxious to get up here and tell us about this.
That's right, I'm on standby. So I will put my presentation to share here. All right, as you mentioned, Mayor, so this is a general plan zone change. There we go. For 3.2 acres. You can see the property here outlined in red. Just to provide some context, so on the north, you have the Dutch Brothers and then America First Credit Union. On the east side of 3200 West, starting at the corner, you've got a convenience store, a car wash. There's a daycare, a couple of office buildings, and then condos directly across the street. On the south and kind of wrapping the corner on the west, you've got some homes, and then directly west, you have duplexes. So it's kind of an interesting mix of uses in the immediate vicinity there. This property currently is zoned C2, and the general plan is for commercial use. And the request here is to change that of the zoning to the RM zone and a general plan change to medium density residential, which would be up to 12 units to the acre is the request. This next image is a close-up of that site. One just a little interesting side note, and doing some research on this site, this property used to be developed as a mobile home park. And if you look out on the site, there's still fire hydrants out on the property. So that goes way back. So just to provide a little bit more context. So this image here is a home that is directly south of the property. Then this next image is looking from 3200 West across the property. So out in the distance, you can see the duplexes that are west of the property. This would be the entrance to the America First there on the north side of the property. This is looking south on 3200 West. So the property in question here on the right side of the image. Just some of the uses across the street on the east side of 32, so the daycare and the office building, another office building, the condos, they're across the street. And then you can see the entrance to the condos. Looking to the northwest from 32, so you can see out in the distance, the Arby's and the America First and Dutch Brothers. So this is the concept plan. The original proposal was for 37 townhomes. After looking at that, in the Planning Commission's recommendation and in the development agreement, they had recommended that a couple of units be dropped to increase the amount of parking. So under this current concept plan, if you include the driveways and some of the surface parking, is at 3.8 stalls per unit, including the garages. One thing that's I think of note here is if you look on the north side of the townhome area, you can see this lane of stacked cars, if you will. The idea there is that the owner of the property is retaining about roughly 20 feet or so for the potential future expansion of the drive-up area. So that stacking lane is not currently on the commercial property. So they're reserving that in the event they feel like they need more stacking ability. Yes.
So for either one of the building or commercial uses out front or both?
I asked that question, and at this point, they're not sure that they're actually going to do it. It's and when you look at both the America First and Dutch Brothers, both exceed the ordinance requirement for stacking, but they're just reserving this in the event that they may need to accommodate more stacking. And so undetermined at this point, but likely would be for Dutch Brothers would be my guess.
Okay, thank you.
And so with this concept, the density is actually just under 11 units to the acre. And what follows here would be just some of the plans for the units. So they're two-story units. These would have basements, and the developer in the development agreement is proposing to finish the basement. So if you include the above grade areas, 1,550 square feet, and then the finished basements would be 750 square feet. So altogether, finished space is about 2,300 square feet. So this would be the basement level, and then the area in the back is where the garage is, or the slab for the garage. Main level would be the garage and then the kitchen and living space, and then the upper level would be the bedrooms. So there's two different styles of buildings. You have a 4-unit building and a 5-unit building. So this being the 5-unit building here. The developer I had mentioned, Brad Reynolds Construction, and just for reference, Brad Reynolds Construction is the same developer that did the villages at 27th. It's the project on 27th West and roughly 45th South across from UDOT.
Yeah, from you. Okay.
Here's just an image of the rear elevation on the other side. These are just renderings of the 5-unit building. And then the rendering of the back. And then just, again, the 4-unit building, very similar. So I won't spend a lot of time on these, same type of layout. And then the elevations for the 4-unit building. And finally, the renderings of the 4-unit building. And that summarizes this request.
So just looking at the information here, it says there are 4 on-street parking spaces. I assume it must be there by the park area.
So what they're showing for, go back to this, they're showing those on the south side, kind of in the middle of the project, those 4 spaces there. Their
Oh,
main
right
kind
there,
of,
I see where you're saying.
right,
Okay, so for this whole development then, there are a number of them that have driveways. So if someone comes to visit them, they can park in the driveway or they can fill that up. But there are 8 units that have only garage parking, no other parking.
correct, right. So of the 35, 27 have driveways that are deep enough to park in, and those 8 do not.
Okay, and so unless they have good patrols, I assume that those 8 will use those 4 parking spaces except for the handicap one. And then they'll park out on 32nd West. So I have a concern because I don't think 32nd West that we want to have them parking out there.
Right, and if you look at I'll go back to that image, there's really not space. You can see here in the shoulder for on-street parking on 32. So
Oh, I've seen around the city, many times people will park
I was gonna
in
say,
that little space there. And part of it's out in the travel lane. Pretty common.
Lake Park is a very good example of that. So truly, I agree with Mayor that they either need to have 8 or more parking, community parking stalls, not just 4. I think you need at least 1. Most of the driveways can accommodate 2 vehicles though, can't they? In the driveways
yes.
themselves,
yes,
so they could have 2 in the garage, 2 in the driveway.
correct.
So, yeah, maybe they really need 16. So that when they have guests, they're not imposing on other people. My other question is, how deep is their driveways? Because when I park in some people's driveways, I'm over the sidewalk.
Right, so they have proposed 18 feet, which is a typical parking stall depth is
Okay.
what's proposed.
A couple of slides up, there's a rendering that shows some parallel parking. Is that just conceptual? That's not a part of this.
I'll go to those renderings. I don't,
Yeah, I saw that
Yeah,
too.
right
That one
there.
right there.
so this, yeah, the parallel stalls won't be there. It's just those 90, those 4 90-degree stalls. Sorry for toggling back and forth a lot here. It would be just those 4 that they're proposing.
Seems pretty inadequate. And then just the one way in and out, that 3270 stub doesn't connect in any way to this, right?
On the west side,
Yeah.
right, that's a great question. So we looked at that and the challenge, and I'll go back to the aerial image. Try to not make people seasick and toggling through so many images here. As you look at that, the challenge we ran into there is that most of that stub street is already has development up against it. If there were more of that stub that were exposed, there would be a way to maybe put in a cul-de-sac, but as we looked at it, there's just too much of it that's already has development around it to successfully extend that road through. Yeah, unfortunately, when in particular, when those duplexes were built, it really precluded the road to be extended north.
Steve, is the applicant the owner, or is this an application and he might buy it later if the application's approved?
I'm sorry, I missed it.
Is the applicant the current owner of the property?
No, it's under contract.
And if this used to be a mobile home park, have all of the pads been removed?
Yeah, so the only thing that I'm aware of it that's remaining, look like there's a couple of fire
Yeah,
hydrants.
I
still
know there
there.
are fire hydrants there,
And-
but
Kind of the history was back in the 80s, the property was rezoned for a Smith's grocery store. And for the longest time, it was owned by Smith's, but then that just never materialized. And then the property was acquired by America First, and they just, of course, developed the front portion of the property, but then the balance has remained vacant.
You know, this is kind of interesting in that, you know, with this development, given what we traditionally have been seeing in our city, there will be some of these that will have more than 4 vehicles parked or there to, you know, to living in that unit. So the question becomes, where will they park? And I'm just trying to figure that out in my mind. See, in most places in the city, if you do a single family home, you know, standalone, you have a street to park on. But here in this development, there's no street to park on. So even if you go with the 8 parking stalls or whatever for, so at least there's one additional for those apartments. The question of parking will be an issue over time. That's why I raised that issue about out on 32nd West. And I say, good luck, credit union, because very likely people will park overnight in your spot there or in your property. Simply because that's where things are headed right now.
Yeah,
I don't have an answer for that, but it is a concern.
I mean, I think we could put up no parking signs on 3200 West, so before the development came to be, so they knew there was no parking, but I think they need more internal parking by a lot.
I agree.
But
I don't
may
think
one-
8 will do it.
One issue that did come up with the planning commission is right now, the ordinance just requires 2 parking spaces for a townhome. And the discussion was, you know, this is a recurring discussion on townhome developments that perhaps the code should be changed to increase that number so that then instead of kind of, you know, negotiating that, it's just in the code and that we want more parking from the get-go.
Well, and as we saw over in Lake Park, they fill their garages as a storage unit and then they don't even park in their garage. I wish we could mandate that, but you have a garage park, and that's what concerns me about the ones without the driveway, that they'll just use their garage as storage and then they'll need street parking, and these streets don't look big enough for emergency vehicles if there's anything on the streets. So yeah, I think there needs to be a lot more parking.
Well, I think the issue is, you know, is beyond that in the sense of, you know, how we see our neighborhoods changing. And given, you know, the push for affordable housing and the fact that many people can't afford to live in a single family home, you get more and more vehicles there. And that's growing. That trend is not going the other way. And so how do we address that? Not quite sure what to do. Should we start saying to developers, you know, you've got to have a lot more parking? Or because what will we do? should we hire more parking enforcement officers? Because we know it's going to be a problem. I don't know. I don't have a quick and easy solution. I just know it's a concern. And we're seeing that more and more.
Yeah, I think that's a good topic, definitely to address
Oh, why don't we have a,
moving forward. But on this particular one, in the planning commission minutes, it mentioned that it was proposed to reduce a couple of housing units
Huh.
to be able to raise
Well.
that parking ratio. Is this one being presented today? Does that include a reduction in units?
It does. So
This is the,
the original one had 37, this one's 35, and there were fewer, essentially what happened is they were able to add another row of townhomes that had driveways. So instead of like having driveways you could park in, now essentially roughly 3/4 do. So that lowered the number of units, but then bumps the parking from like 3.2 to 3.3 to 3.8 stalls per unit.
just closer to what more other recent developments that have been approved are at as well.
Correct.
Just still seems like so little parking offset. Thank you.
well, since I brought that up a little bit later on, I'll bring it up again and see if we ought to do a communication, see if we ought to look at that again. See what recommendations staff would have on dealing with this. I'm just, where do we go from? here?
Well, and the other thing is we did not pass the parking enforcement at businesses. I mean, I remember that we did not pass it, but is there any enforcement if these people, fill up on the weekend, fill up America First, or can America First do anything about that? They could still personally, they could call for tow trucks, they could pay the tow trucks. They could hope that when it's redeemed, they get their money back or whatever their deal is with the towing company. I mean, I think we're gonna push them north rather than onto the street.
Yeah.
And put that burden on the business there.
Okay,
So are we, Steve before suggested we have a week in between for negotiating that. Are we doing that or are we seeing this next week?
So it's on the regular meeting for next week.
Next week. So, yeah, unless the parking is resolved, I couldn't vote for this as is. So I don't know what we need to do.
And I can certainly relay to the developer the concern about the parking and see how they would like to, or how he would like to address it.
I think we have a little bit of a problem because I would like to see this developed.
Yeah.
It's been sitting there a long time.
Mhm.
Something like this would seem to be appropriate because probably not going to be single family homes, probably doesn't fit any big commercial use. But then when they comply with our ordinance on parking and we're still saying no, I think that we just need to change our parking ordinance.
I agree.
Agreed.
I think we've brought it up a million times. We just haven't done it. And
Yeah,
I think we need to just move forward and
get it taken care of
change
so
it.
that when people apply and they check the boxes, they're comfortable that it's going to happen.
But the hangup then comes if we change our parking ordinance before we pass this one. It was designed and started
Yeah.
under the old ordinance. So,
Well, but this requires a zoning change.
Yeah, it doesn't have a vested right unless we
Yeah.
change the zoning.
that's.
Well, and maybe we ought to broaden that as we look at that. Is there anything we can do in these situations? Because there's not a lot of these left. Okay. Is there, how do we change that? Do we modify our landscaping? What options are even available to us to make this work? Because I agree with Steve. I'd like to see this develop, but I just have this concern of what will actually happen there. Haven't seen it in many places.
Does anybody complain that there's too much parking at places?
No. No, we just have a lot of cars on the road is the
Yeah,
problem.
right. But I mean, what if we maybe with multifamily units started requiring parking garages? Those are expensive, but they could get their units instead of spreading
true.
out and saying, okay, we're gonna lose half our property to surface parking. If they took one of those and parked 16 cars in it or whatever it is, 20 cars, then they, I mean, they could still have more parking and more units than if they had to do it as surface parking.
Anything else? Oh, at one point, I know, and I'm just going back in my own memory, and this is the way I termed it. I said, when there's a development, it's got to be a development that says, wow, that's great.
Yeah, to change the zoning. Which is, I think, unfortunate in this case because I would like to approve it, but I don't think that I could. And I'd hate to see it go another 20 years or 40 years and I mean, somebody's going to develop it, whether this is the development or not, because
Well, but there are options. Now, some of them make it so the project doesn't work. Okay, so if, like you said, we said half of it has to be parking, that would probably kill the deal. But are there other things we could do that would still make it a reasonable deal for the owner and developer to proceed forward with some modifications that would make sense? See, I look at that and I say, well, gee, what if we took out a couple of the townhomes and made that parking? Or even 4, at what point does it become no longer workable? And can staff come up with some other suggestions how this would work and still be a successful project, but actually work for the reality we're dealing with today?
And just quickly to answer that question, Mayor, really the two scenarios would be, number one, as you mentioned, you're dropping units that then could be either more parking along the street or being able to introduce the driveways into those units that don't have driveways. And the reason for that is right now, so the open space requirement is 50%, which is they're right at that. So the only way now to get more paving in is by either reducing units or giving them a break on the open space. Those are really the two options. So either they have a reduction in the open space or they reduce units so they can have more paving.
And I think the open space is important. We don't have a really great, huge park down there. And keeping your own kids in your own backyard is so much more sensible.
the park would be Fairborn Station, probably.
Yeah,
And that's.
but
a
it doesn't
ways-
really have slides and swings and,
No. and it's a
typical
little
park.
Ways away.
yeah.
But if the zoning change is denied, this isn't, that's why I asked if this applicant was the owner. This applicant's not the owner. He might go somewhere else. But that would give the council time to revamp the ordinance if it wanted to, and somebody else could be an applicant. I
Yeah.
mean, or if it's approved, then it's gonna happen. If it doesn't happen, it's gonna run with the land and it's gonna have rights vested and
Yeah. I'd rather see us do it right the first time. And maybe the applicant has a great solution. They know their numbers and their plans better than we do, so. I say give them a couple days if we have to delay it until they come up with something. We can continue it a week or two.
If I may, just for clarification, as I go back and talk with the developer, if they were to say be at like 4 stalls per unit, I'm just trying to get an idea of at what point would that be sufficient where they, if he can kind of shoot for a number if it,
I think if everybody had a driveway in front of their garage,
Yeah, and it needs to be a little different from saying, we'll put some more on-street parking. Those are kind of for visitors. I'm okay with, in this particular case, not worrying about that, but like Councilman Bueller said, that each of them have 4 parking spaces, basically at or near their unit that's dedicated to their unit. A few of them will not use them, maybe, but I suspect that many will.
if somebody's gonna park their car in one of those 4 parking spaces that never leaves.
Yeah.
And now we only have 3 parking spaces. And so, but they're not gonna do that in somebody else's driveway. So
Right.
I think when we count spaces per home, we're really looking at their driveway and garage.
Any further comments? All right, let's move on to next agenda item. This is Resolution 21-190, expressing support for the city's application for transportation and land use connection grant funding. Who's good? Steve?
Mr. Pastor.
Okay.
thank
And
you,
this
Mayor.
is not the same thing as what we did before, the 50,000 that a few years ago when we did a study. This is different.
Correct. So Wasatch Front Regional Council has this transportation and land use connection program to allow cities to apply for essentially planning funds. And the intent here would be to apply for funds to update the city's general plan. So our general plan was last adopted or last updated in 2015. We had a lot of changes since then. Just to name a few, the Mountain View corridor completion, a lot of new development, lots of changes in land values, just a lot of changes have happened since then. So the intent here would be the city would be requesting $36,000 and that the match would be 4,000 of that if we're successful. So essentially what this resolution does is just authorize the city to make the application in that when we're applying for the application, if the city is selected as a grant recipient, they just want to know that we're committed to provide the match of the $4,000. So that's the purpose for this resolution, is just to support our application in the event we are awarded the funds and need to pay the match.
Any questions?
Just a clarification for the process, Steve. So when the TLC program says provides technical assistance, that's basically all, right? So they're not, by providing grants, saying we want you to incorporate these type of planning principles or transportation principles or whatever, right? There's no
Right.
strings in that manner.
The city drives the ship on what gets into the general plan.
Okay. Thank you. Then next we go to our new business scheduled for next week. This is, I believe, an administrative action, application PUD-3/2021 by Greg Larson, property at 6765 West, 3500 South.
Could be Mr. Lehman. That's great.
Oh, there he is.
Thank you, Mayor.
I
Steve
was looking
Lehman.
around back here. So go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Steve Lehman with the Planning and Zoning Division. This application is a request from Greg Larson, who is requesting final plat approval for the cottages at Smith Farm. This project will be somewhat familiar to the council in that it was rezoned in May of this year. from the A zone to the RM zone. And accompany with that rezone was a development agreement that will guide the proposed project. So the property is located on 3500 South, 6800 West. This is part of the Tom Pierce property that Tom is actually going to buy the first unit in this development. So this is just an aerial photograph showing where the property is located. The next slide is just a little bit of a zoomed in version. Mr. Pierce has used this property for agricultural purposes, running horses on the property that he's enjoyed for many years. The next slide, we did take a couple of photographs. This is looking from 3500 South due south. So this will be the main entrance between the gray storage unit there and to the south. The next slide is just a view to the north or southwest. So you see the Cash Saver, the old gas station on the corner there. The next slide is going down 6800 West. This is a rather unique right-of-way at the present time. On the west side, you have a little strip of asphalt that provides access to various homes. It's divided in the middle by an irrigation ditch, power lines, some trees, and then on the east side is a dirt road. The next slide is looking back across from the west side of 6800, looking east along 3500 South. The next slide is looking, I believe, down the lane. There are three homes on the east side of 6800 West. One of those is Mr. Pierce's home, I believe the one in the middle. And those properties are not part of the subdivision, but we will have public improvements installed along them that Mr. Larson will be doing as part of his project. Next slide, just to give you a little bit of a flavor for what exists between the east and the west sides of 6800 is this irrigation ditch, utility poles and various trees. This will be piped. The poles will be removed, underground power lines, and the trees will also be removed for the new right-of-way. This is looking down the east side of 6800. As you can see, it is not improved, has never had asphalt. It's just a dirt road that provides access to a couple of homes further to the south on this side of the street. This is looking back, looking north from Mr. Larson's property is on the right side of this. Well, it'll be on the right side or the east side of 6800. The next slide is looking further down 6800. And the next slide is looking further to the south on this right of way. So the left portion of this slide is the property that will be developed. Improvements will be installed along the east side of this right of way across Mr. Larson's property all the way out to 3500 South. And then just looking back across the property to be developed. So this is the site plan that is being proposed by Mr. Larson. The project consists of 65 units on 10 acres, so just about 6.5 units per acre. This is a project that is planned for senior community. Units here will be 1 story in height. During the rezone application, the city council requested that 25% of these units have a loft or bonus room above the garage to provide for either living space or storage space. So units here will be 1,500 square feet. For those 25%, that would probably increase about 400 square feet, making the unit 1,900 square feet. So in this particular development, all units have a 2-car garage. All units have 2 parking spaces in front of the garage, getting back to the last rezone application that Mr. Pastrick presented to you. And then in this application, Mr. Larson is proposing 13 additional guest parking spaces. So parking here exceeds quite a bit the number that we have in our current ordinances. We'll show you some illustrations of some buildings in just a minute. This is a craftsman style bungalow. There will be multiple elevations and colors. Materials here are proposed to be stone and fiber cement. All units will have a patio off of the dining or living area from the dwelling. As we mentioned, I think we have just a couple other illustrations there of these units. So we're really happy with Mr. Larson. He's done a really good job, we think, of providing some really good alternatives for folks to live here. Each of those elevations that you saw also have some variations to them. So there will be quite the variety in the project. This project will have a clubhouse of about 2,800 square feet. That'll have a kitchen, fitness center, a gathering area. The developer's not yet sure what large amenity he wants to propose here, whether it will be a pool or a pickleball court. I think he's waiting until sales start to occur and then sort of fill residents out as to what amenity they would like here. The last thing to mention here is there is a walking path around the perimeter of the project for those who live here. So this is the final plat that you are reviewing this evening. And Mr. Larson's excited to do another project here in the city. And that is our report.
Steve, the mayor suggested this is administrative. Is that right? There's no ask here, just approval. They've checked all the boxes.
Correct. Mr. Larson has complied with the development agreement that was approved by the city council.
Thanks.
So on one of the maps, it only shows the one outlet, but am I correct in presuming there's two? One onto 68 and one onto 35th?
Correct. So the primary access is from 3,500 south. The developer is proposing a second access onto 6,800 west.
Okay, thank you.
I know you mentioned the parking ratio exceeds, the agreed upon, but what, do you know that off the top of your head what that is? Just because it's top of mind, parking ratio.
Yeah, so each of the units here, all of the units here have 4 spaces. 2 inside the garage, 2 in the driveway. So 4 spaces per unit. And then in addition to that, there are 13 guest spaces that will be located in and throughout the development, primarily by the clubhouse for those that may be having a family gathering or party.
Thank you.
Anything else? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Plat approval. Next, we have our consent agenda. And within those, there's some variety of items. And so maybe if that could be clarified, I think some of these are ADA compliance issues. Some are not. And so maybe just identify which are which.
Sure. Mr. Johnson, are you here? I couldn't remember if he was online or here. You want to just kind of break them down? Don't have to go through the detail.
A lot of times I just say, these are all 4,700 south, but I can't do that tonight.
They're not all 4,700 south this time. I anticipated your question. And the
Well,
first one,
Well, for example, the first one is a unique one in that it's an easement for
correct,
a power corridor.
yes.
And then some of them are for these ADA compliant types of things, or at least that's what it looked like.
The bottom 4 are for pedestrian ramps. We're in the process of putting together a project to reconstruct pedestrian ramps and make them compliant. Most of these have just a high back curb, no ramp at all at a corner. So we're putting in new ADA compliant ramps, but they require a bigger footprint. And many of these, the existing property just comes to a corner. And so we're already occupying a portion of that land, but the new ramps require a bigger footprint. So we're purchasing little corner clips. That's the bottom 4 of those. And then we have 2 of these that are on 3,500 south. We're working on a little, it's called the 35, well, we're calling it the 5,200 west, 3,500 south safe sidewalk project. And we went after some state funds to build some sidewalk it's a little piece of sidewalk on a state highway. And there's 2 parcels on 3,500 south that we're purchasing a little bit of right of way for that sidewalk project to fill in a gap just east of this traffic signal at 5,200 west. it's really 2 lots there that will be included in this little project. So that's the other 2, and then there's 14700 South acquisition.
So there are those 2 that are safe sidewalks.
Yes,
And then are there 5 of the ADA?
I counted 4.
4.
Yep, and then 14700 South and 1 easement from Rocky Mountain Power.
Okay, yeah, the Honeywood Lane. Oxford, okay, and then the power pole.
And we anticipate that you'll see several of these little corner clips for the ped ramps in weeks.
Any questions on these? Because there's a variety there, I just wanted to kind of clarify that from, especially since I have to talk about them next week. Okay, thank you very much. Now we're down to communications. We have a couple of strategic plan presentations. And so, Mr. Pyle, I don't know if you want to do a preliminary introduction here.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll just make a general comment to all of the strategic plan presentations, as this is the first night that we're starting the cycle in the kind of the annual cycle. And as you know, we do one of these for each one of the departments, basically just reviewing what has happened during the year. Sometimes we're talking about looming issues coming before us. Maybe there's some programmatic changes we might want to talk about. Mostly though, they're in preparation for the strategic plan meeting that the council holds in January. So that's all I really need to say in terms of them generally, and I won't say anything specific to each one. I believe the community development, first up on the agenda though is going to be Mr. Pastor. Again, is that right, Steve? Yep. Okay, very good.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. I think I'm going for a record presentation number here in one meeting. So we're, first of all, excited to welcome Neighborhood Services as part of our department. We feel it's a great addition to community development. We'll talk more about how that fits in with community development. So first of all, I want to discuss building inspections. So by all measures, when you look at this past fiscal year and the prior fiscal year, everything was up. So that was good. Our construction valuation was up, the number of permits, fees, and then you'll notice also the number of units, residential units was up substantially. That was largely because of the Sage Valley apartment development there on Redwood and 41st South. You'll notice that on the image there, warehousing was the big item in 2019 and 2020, and then a lot of townhomes and residential this year or this past fiscal year has been really driving the growth in this past fiscal year. But looking behind the numbers or putting a face to the numbers, I wanted to talk a little bit about what a typical permit looks like and the time involved. So for a typical single family home, you're looking at 12 inspections on average and about 8 hours spent on a home in terms of inspections. But when you compare that with an apartment complex, which is handled as a single permit, let's say there's 250 units in that apartment complex, you can see there's over 2,200 hours spent on inspections. And because of, with apartments, the construction is more complicated. There's more things to inspect like sound walls and plumbing that goes through multiple floors. So there's just more things that have to be inspected. So hopefully it gives you a better appreciation for what goes into when we say a permit, what's involved in that. We were talking about parking earlier. Here's another form of structured parking. Not intentional though. So one of the things that often Jerry, our chief building official, is involved in is whenever there's any type of an emergency like this, he's out on scene inspecting to make sure things are still structurally sound, but then also in doing an inspection on the back end once the repairs are done. So that's another unique face to what we do with permitting. And also more recently in helping support Operation My Hometown, there's been many rehab projects as part of days of service. And so building inspections providing technical support to those projects, making sure things are done to code like this ramp you see here in this image. And this slide for neighborhood services, shifting gears to sum up, this is really saying that Craig is a rock star, right? He does a lot. You can see, just supporting different different departments in the city to the Clean and Beautiful Committee. Just he has his fingers in a lot of things in the city. Just some specific examples you can see, just for example, neighborhood block parties. One of the notable things about this past year was that we had 10 new areas in my hometown area that had block parties for the first time. It had never had block parties before. So we're excited about that and just one of the many fruits of my hometown. Another significant achievement here would be with National Night Out. We've received national recognition for 17 years running. When you look at the other 25 cities in Utah that participate in that, we're unique in that regard. So, and that's largely kudos to Craig. As you all know, the city, we participate in the Giving Tree, so Craig helps support that effort. Just another recent event that was supported for the Veterans Memorial ribbon cutting. Craig was there again, just like many other events to help with the setup there. Another interesting point about Operation My Hometown. So we have regular meetings as the city with the volunteers that are leading that effort. And one of the things I really appreciate about that effort, one of many things I appreciate is how it's breaking down barriers. So one example of that is the city for many years has had home rehabilitation programs. Oftentimes the struggle with that is getting people that maybe have a distrust of government to want to participate in those programs. And so by having Operation My Hometown operating these neighborhoods, we're having people participate in programs that before were maybe a little bit skeptical, but because of the relationships that are being built, we're now seeing more success with being able to implement some of these programs. So that's just one of many of the fruits of my hometown. Finally, with planning and zoning, just like with building inspections, we've seen a significant bump in just activity across the board. So you look at the numbers. I want to just briefly mention what's involved in each of these items. So with proactive enforcement cases, these are not responding to complaints. This is more us systematically going down streets like Redwood Road, 35th South, and doing inspections and looking for violations. And I'll show a couple of examples of that. License reviews would be verifying zoning compliance for all new license applications. With building permit reviews, planning and zoning is really only looking at things that have a zoning aspect to them. So we're not looking at water heaters, for example. The court cases is something that's fairly new for us. For all the code cases that need administrative law judge review, that's handled through our department now. And you see the reason for the substantial bump there is in 2019-20 or 2020, we had COVID, of course. And so that limited the number of cases we were able to handle, but it's now well underway. With land use applications, that's involving things like subdivisions, zone changes, and the like. And then presentations. Tonight, I think is a good example. Several things on the agenda. So I think would be of interest here. This image is from a business that was on Redwood Road. This is an example of one of our proactive enforcement efforts. So we don't often get people that would complain, for example, on a commercial street about this, but as we go through and inspect and you see landscaping that's dying, that we'll look for things like this as well as any other, say, garbage on the site, and you can see the before and after here. Here's another example of a commercial business where behind the business, there's a lot of things that were clearly being stored there that needed to be cleaned up. So we've really seen some significant progress in just appearances as we go down our major streets with our enforcement efforts. And finally, just wanted to point out, and tonight we saw one example of this. One of the notable things for this past year, we had 3 senior condo projects that were reviewed and approved by the city council. And then just tonight, we saw one of those plats coming forward to the council. So that just gives you an idea of just some of the larger projects that happened over the last year. So just appreciate the opportunity just to provide a high-level overview of things happening in the department, and happy to answer any questions.
Council?
When calculating the number of new constructions, is, let's say, something started construction in May, completed in September, which fiscal year does it go into? The completion or the start of the project?
Right, so these numbers are for when the permit was issued, not
Okay.
completed.
Thank you.
Not hearing any more comments or questions?
Do you have any more presentations for us, Steve?
Not tonight.
Steve
We might
shows
call
up.
you back. though.
Wait until next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Mayor, got Mr. Nord doing the Economic Optimization Department next. Sit with his
Thank you,
staff.
Eric. Yeah. Oh, I saw him come in.
Test. We hearing this clearly?
You
Thank
have a
you,
good,
City
strong
Council. It's
voice.
good to be back in front of you. My name's Mark Nord. I'm the Economic Optimization Department Director. It's a new title, very much like the legislature trends to change the RDA acronyms. We're going to throw one at you here now too. So this is a new department and some little housekeeping items we're going to tackle first. Eric, you can go to the next slide. Sorry, I don't have the clicker. Because of the success that we've had over the last few years with the redevelopment agency, we're able to now expand into some other areas of the city with some other divisions that we've created. The first one is obviously we're keeping the redevelopment agency as part of this department, and we'll go into that. Next arm that we have included was one of the hats that Nicole Cottle used to wear. One of the 12 hats that she was wearing. We're now taking in government affairs. And the last one is asset optimization. I'll go into that a little bit more in the presentation. So next slide, please. The redevelopment agency, these are all familiar faces for you. We have Nate Webster, who is in charge of business retention. Jeff Jackson over business development. And the difference between those two positions is Jeff is on the front end doing a lot of the legwork and recruiting the companies to get here. Well, we don't just say, thanks for coming, go fend for yourselves. We now hand them off to Nate Webster, who makes sure that once they're here, they stay here and they're happy. So he's in charge of meeting them on a regular basis, making sure that they are staying content. They're not, as they grow here in West Valley City, we help to make sure that they find new locations if they've outgrown their existing one. Basically, it's the red carpet concierge type of service that we offer to our local businesses. This is unique to West Valley City. Most cities do not have a retention specialist. And if they do, they're certainly not at the level where we are, where we're meeting with them on a yearly basis. We understand their needs and we understand their problems. And we try to hit them off before they get to a point where they're escalated and they've now said, hey, we're done, we want to move. So our goal is we hit it off before that ever happens and they never complain and they're happy and want to stay here for a good amount of time. Next, we have John Springmeyer, who's the fiscal manager, and the ever so important Bridget Castro, who keeps us all running. So most important MVP right there. Next slide. These are the metrics of success for the redevelopment agency. These are goals that were set forth actually right when I came to the city 12 years ago. At that time, they were very lofty and they still are. I remember when I first came to the city, Nicole put these goals forward and I kind of looked at my colleagues and I was like, are we really going to be able to pull this off? And it's been an amazing story over the last 10 years, the amount of growth that we've seen in West Valley City. And we're going to show that in the next slide. But these metrics for success are based on getting out and meeting with our local businesses. So the first category is how many visits are we out doing with the local businesses and how many of these new recruits are turning into actual completed projects. The next one visit and identify issues within our top businesses within the city. So we make sure that everybody's happy and tucked in well. New job creation. Our goal is 1,000 new jobs every year. And new capital investment. That's 100 million every year. That's a lot, given that you think of a Costco is like 20 million. So we're doing 5 Costco's a year, guys. That's a lot. That's a big goal. And Nicole, unabashed, looked at me and said, yep, you can do it. And so we went out and went after it. These are figures from what we just did last year. Obviously, the amount of kind of introductions that turn into successes is still relatively high. The amount of visits that we do, these are personal visits. These are not just phone calls or anything. These are actually visits, meeting with top level C-level employees, understanding the nature and the health of their business. The amount of jobs that we created, outstanding. We've held that trend for a number of years. And then the capital investment. It's been unique. And I'll say that because COVID has affected a lot of cities differently. West Valley City has seen a tremendous amount of growth in capital investment. This is due to a number of factors, one of which is a lot of these bigger projects have taken years to get to the final spot where they're actually issuing a building permit. These are negotiations that have occurred through recruitment and dealing with landowners. So they take a lot of time, but I think our efforts over the last few years are starting to pay off, where we're really becoming known as the place to develop. Next slide. And this slide is a great indicator to showcase that we are on the radar of not only local developers, but on a national level. So back to Nicole's goal of 100 million. I remember being so daunted by that goal, and I'm happy to report that we've hit it over the last 5 years, and we've actually hit it a little bit further back. We've only missed it once in the last 12 years. But 19 and 20 was outstanding, and I don't know if we can ever replicate it, guys. That was just crazy.
Mark, you're missing a year.
Which one? 16, 17, 17, 18?
Yeah, 17, 18.
Oh, you're right. We did. I think that was a mislabel, not a year missed.
Okay,
So
so-
I apologize for that. Yes. Thank you for catching that, Councilman Bueller.
So we're one
Should've
off
known.
then.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine.
Yes, but these are the last 5 years. So that 1920 year last year was just outstanding, and it was a lot of big warehouse industrial projects finally came to fruition. That is our bread and butter here in West Valley City, because of our geographical location with all the major freeways that we're associated with, as well as we are kind of becoming the hub for the Intermountain West as far as distribution of goods. This is really becoming our big stake in the ground. So next slide, please. Sales tax, as you can see, we're continually growing. This is something we monitor very closely. This is how we view our health and as a city. When these start to trend down, we really start to look and see where and why. We have a very strong pulse on our sales tax indicators. So when dealerships stop selling as many cars, when grocery is starting to go down, we really start to notice really quickly, and we get in front of Wayne and let them know, hey, we're seeing a spike in this, or we're seeing a drop in this. And we try to understand why. We go out and meet with the businesses, but also start to predict so he can obviously prepare the budgets accordingly and make sure we're protected. So next slide. And new job growth. It's one thing to build a lot of great buildings, but it's also creating jobs and making sure that we have jobs for our local residents. We're very proud of the amount of new jobs that we create on an annual basis. One of the things that this doesn't take into account that we're tracking even closer now is there is ongoing growth and expansion that occurs with the tenants that are already existing in West Valley City that aren't included in these. So Amazon doubled their employee count, obviously, because of the distribution. We don't track that in this number. This is just numbers that are brand new that have come to the city. So we're experiencing larger growth in new jobs, but we don't account for those that are already here. Next slide. These are some of those bread and butter projects that I've been talking to you about. These are all these large warehouse industrial distribution buildings. are out at Freeport West, that's at 7200 West and 201, has become one of the more valuable industrial parks in the state. They have a great range of different tenants that are located there. And I think this is one of the first parks that kind of put us on the national radar for industrial warehouse. We've now since caught the eye of Sansone, who's doing a lot of stuff on what we call the triangle, which is the northern portion of 201 that as it kind of jogs north, there creates this little triangle. We called it that. So great national developers are now looking at West Valley City as a place to place their money. As you all are aware, Hexcel expanding. It's phenomenal the amount of investment that they're putting into West Valley City. And it's just a vote of confidence in how the workforce is here and how we've treated them as partners. This research facility is going to be state of the art and something that's, I think the state of Utah is going to be very proud to hold on a mantle as their aeronautics division kind of feather in their cap. We can go through these. Everybody's familiar with all these different projects that we're working on. So next slide. How do we do what we do? So the first part is business recruitment. We found very early on that the main gatekeepers to getting in front of these deals was the brokers. A lot of different cities will put their emphasis on maybe site selectors and associations like EDC Utah or things like that. We felt like the first line of attack is truly the brokers. And we spend a tremendous amount of time fostering relationships with them to not only get them in front of opportunities that come up, but also to be able to be their first call when they think of a project that's coming in this area. We always want to have that very close relationship with these brokers. So as they're contacted by a company out of California, they reach out to the local CBRE broker, we're their first call. And we have to constantly educate brokers on what's available in West Valley City, be it land, be it a building that's becoming vacant. The success is based on arming them with the best education we can about what's going on in our city. If we can do that, then we're successful. Otherwise, they just go on LoopNet and we're competing with every other listing that's on there. So once, like I said earlier, once we have recruitment handled, the retention aspect kicks in, and really Nate does a fantastic job. He's very personable and he makes friends with C-level employees very quickly. And he provides that concierge level service. Oftentimes it has nothing to do with the redevelopment agency, but Nate will help direct them. And he has that relationship now where they call and maybe it's a public works issue or whatnot, but being able to guide them and they feel like they're getting their voice heard and answered or their question resolved quickly is very valuable for these companies. And it expedites a lot of frustration. So we're cutting things off early before they become a bigger problem. Next slide, Eric, please. So you guys have all heard about this, the shipping container delay. This is an issue that we're tracking. Why? Because we want to understand how it's affecting our local industry. It's why I'm bringing it up in this presentation is we are constantly working with our companies to understand where are their choke points, where are their pain points, how can we help? And to understand what's going on here helps us not only do forecasting, but also start to target, okay, what are we going to start to need in the future to prepare for things that affect West Valley City's businesses like the blockage of the port. So we're constantly keeping a pulse, and this is something I think as we look at the distribution of goods, having the inland port and us being a part of it is becoming more and more valuable. Next slide, please. So now let's go to the asset optimization division. Andy Carroll is a new hire that he's been with us now for about 4 months, and he has a very successful resume of taking entities and optimizing them and making them as valuable as possible. We're extremely fortunate to have him. His role will be to, next slide, please, oversee and interact with the different venues that we have at the city pertaining to entertainment, like the Maverick Center, Harmon Hall, the USANA Amphitheater, Family Fitness Center, Utah Cultural Celebration Center. And really what he does is he has a great private sector mindset where he's coming in and he's able to look at ways we can vertically integrate all of these different entertainment venues. These are things that make us unique in West Valley City. Not every city has this many cool entertainment venues. So this is something we should be really trying to optimize, and how do we market them all together? So cross promoting, when the Harmon Hall is putting on a play, is it marketed at the Maverick Center? Is it marketed at the USANA Amphitheater? So there's always things going on. He's really good at being able to see the big picture and how do we make all of these assets optimize and be up to the best standard that we expect from them now. He's going to be doing a SWOT analysis, looking at where are their vulnerabilities in some of these venues, how do we make them better, and looking at our outside contracts. Are we getting the best deals, creating new revenue possibilities within these venues too? Next slide. This is another franchise player, as I like to call it. Many of you know Lincoln Shirts. I don't really need to go into his experience background. Another huge coup to bring him on. I don't think he's as good as Nicole, but he's about as close as we can get. So Lincoln will be our government affairs director, and he'll be working as the liaison with the Utah State Legislature, and then dealing with any outside government agencies as needed, be it UDOT, be it the Utah Association of Counties, Salt Lake County, any of those associations. Lincoln Shirts brings a wealth of knowledge as well as a long history of interacting with those agencies. And like I said, we're very fortunate to have him. And I think there's one more slide, but kind of explains that, as well as he'll be helping us on the federal level. And I mean, we have the chair of the inland port here, so he's really not as helpful there, but outside of that, he'll be very helpful. And with that, I'll turn it over to the council for any questions.
Phenomenal.
Riveting, Steve, Councilman Wheeler.
On that first summary slide where it said that it's prioritized, there's 40 top businesses prioritized. What are the parameters or criteria for setting those 40? What do we
Good
consider a
question.
top?
Yeah.
business?
Sales tax, property tax, and employees. So it's kind of a model based on, are you the top sales tax contributor? Are you the top property tax contributor, and how many employees you have? We kind of blend those up into kind of who are a top.
Thank you.
So Mark, when it says you're visiting the top 40 businesses 93 times.
Yeah.
Does that mean you're visiting 93 businesses or the top?
No, we
40
oftentimes-
businesses
Yeah,
too,
we'll have to
plus
double up
times?
oftentimes
Gotcha.
because like Discover, they require a lot of work in the sense that they just have the most employees. And so we're constantly making sure that they're happy. It's they're a little bit, I don't want to say that it's a very easy company to interact with, don't get me wrong, but they're just, because of their size, it requires multiple visits, making sure everything's fine, because there's different sectors of that business. If we were to lose just the call center alone, we'd lose almost 800 employees, but that's not just the financial side of it either. So
No, that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you're not getting, okay, we hit all 40 businesses, we're done.
No. No.
So that's good.
Just a comment, this was highlighted to me during the pandemic, when we became essentially a resource for businesses on the issues of loans, available funds, what they can do and not do. I heard reference to a lot of that, and it wasn't just for the 40.
yeah,
You made that available to businesses across West Valley City.
yeah.
And that seemed to be, it was very impressive, very impressive.
Thank you.
So,
What's interesting about that is your ability to get out and communicate programs that were available is you're only as effective as your ability to actually contact those businesses. As we've all known, it's sometimes hard to break through that barrier of how do I get to the top level person to let them know, hey, there's grants available. We do a really good job at fostering relationships with the local businesses. And that then proved invaluable when we wanted to roll out these programs, because we could contact them and it's not spam. we could contact them through an email and they know, oh, it's Nate. This is actually probably important. Let me look at it. So I'll give him a lot of credit on that, on building those relationships. So when the government sends an email, it's not just oh, I'm not going to look at that. This is probably important. If Nate emails you, it's probably something you want to look at. So.
You know, Mark, one thing that we haven't seen for a long time are the Mark Nord girls.
I'm married now. That's why.
That it?
I married one of those,
Oh,
actually.
yeah,
And
I
that sounds really
recognized it.
weird. We need context here. We did the Maverick Center unveiling and my now wife brought her friends. And yes, she's very supportive and I'm very lucky to have her.
Anything else?
We appreciate you, council, and all of your support. And we couldn't do this without you guys. And we just appreciate everything you guys empowered us with. So thank you.
Very much.
Campaign finance.
Yeah, anonymous contribution.
Oh, let me take a stab at that, Mayor. So, back during the strategic plan discussion last January, one of the items that the council directed us to take a look at was some potential changes to the campaign ordinance section, particularly what do we do with an anonymous contribution? It was an easy add to propose. It's just a one-line thing, but there are a lot of implications, obviously, that you as a council may want to talk about. The one thing you did ask at the time was that we waited till after the election so that there was no whatever. Not that there would have been any conflict, but any kind of potential conflict or concern or whatever from existing council to council being handed off to. So therefore, we brought it to you in that narrow window of these 4 to 6 weeks in between.
So Wayne, is this the only campaign finance proposal coming forward?
Yes. Unless through conversation,
mean-
council wants us to bring something else, which we're happy to do. Or expand this or contract or whatever.
Because I probably remember this being part of the discussion, but I was more concerned with, say, candidates that don't file their final disclosure and then they just run again 2 years later, 4 years later. There's no penalty. No, I mean, I'd kind of like to see what's required by state law
Okay.
and how do we enforce that? Now, Nicole told us if you don't get this in by 5 o'clock, you're off the
Right,
ballot.
right.
But you know, the December disclosure, I
Yeah.
think is important too. And
Sure.
there's just nothing that happens.
So let me ask this, and this, since this is just communications item, and we set it up that way purposely, we didn't bring it as a first week study item for adoption next week. And I know we've had that conversation before, brought that information, so I know Nicole has it, but it's also been forever since we've had the
Mhm.
discussion too. So if there's anything like that, and we'll make a note of that and bring it back. But anything else additionally to that, yeah, we'll bring it like.
I mean, I
next
would
week.
suggest that if that isn't filed, if it's required by state law and it's not filed,
Right.
then there ought to be a time period where that candidate cannot run. And whatever time period we choose, but I would say something like 5 years, because I don't want to say 4 years, because then we're going to have an argument. Is this 4 years or not? But if you know, so
Right.
that they would miss those next 2 election cycles. But that's just what I was thinking.
Okay.
I don't know what everybody else thinks. Maybe they don't think it's as important as I do either.
In reading it over, I just have a simple question, I guess, from a simple mind, but candidates for a city elected office shall not solicit or accept anonymous campaign contributions of any amount. Any such contributions, they can't accept them, they can't solicit them, but they can distribute them.
Yeah, good
If
point.
we can't accept it, how can we distribute it?
I think when it says dispersed, it's what it's saying is if something happens, let's say you get a contribution in the mail, you didn't ask for it, you didn't solicit it, but you got it
But you got
given
it,
to you
doesn't
anyway.
happen.
But we
There is
can't
a
accept it.
Well, what do you do?
Well, by default, you've taken it. So what are you gonna do with it?
You send it back.
It's cash.
What if there's no
Oh,
return
cash, no
address?
return
Right, no
address.
return, no cash. So
Yeah.
really what that's referring to is there is a provision within state law that says, okay, give it to Nicole or whatever, and they'll dispose of it in a proper way.
Listed in that state listing of all this cash that
I don't
belongs
know.
to somebody
Yeah.
somewhere.
No,
Yeah,
no.
I'm just giving you for instance. I don't actually know what
Yeah.
the
It just,
provision is.
Well,
in my simple mind, it just sounds like, you know, we can't accept it, but we can get rid of it.
We can get
Or
rid
you
of
could
it for
say
you.
any inadvertently received donation or something, you know, that
Sure, yeah. Also
Well-
to that point, again, we're not wedded to anything here, so we can change the language. You could say, hey, you know what? We were thinking about this in January, but we don't want to talk about it now, or we're done, you know, conditions have changed. Yeah, this isn't something that we're bringing because we are proposing it. We're just bringing it in reaction
And
to.
I'm sure it's
councils.
something that the legal minds can explain to me very clearly. But just the way it's written doesn't come across clearly.
Sure.
you know, but as I look at this and as I've filled out a lot of reports, there's a de minimis amount that it's just not worth dealing with. For example, $20. Someone, you're at a meeting, someone hands you $20 and you don't get their name and address and all the information. Those minor amounts are not an issue. What's the issue is if someone sends you a $500 check, that's a big deal, you know, in a campaign.
Well, you have a fundraiser event and you're not tracking who's there and who gave you money and you just walk out of there with $5,000.
Yeah, see, to do it for large amounts, because that's the whole intent of the concept of reporting who's giving you money, because that may influence voters. And I go back to a candidate that was running in Sandy for a city council meeting, and one developer gave her something like $25,000. You know, that's an issue because it says something about the candidate. So having information that the public can review is valuable. But we're not talking about, no one cares if someone gives you $20.
Well, but do you care if 100 people give you $20 or 1,000 people give you $20 each?
And the answer to that, because there's that many, I would say no. Because if you've got that many people to give you money, you see the reporting requirement on that to list 1,000 people.
Well, so then you just say anonymous donors, $5,000.
Can we get clarification on the state code on that? I know we are allowed to be more stringent than what's listed, but I have a feeling that it wasn't a huge amount that was allowed anyways,
Anonymous.
correct?
It's $50.
It's like $50, yeah,
Mhm. And per
So-
calendar year.
per calendar
Yeah.
year, 50 total.
Yeah.
So, yeah. To me, what's proposed here, I'm not strongly for or against because we're only talking about $50. But I agree. I think our previous conversation in strategic planning was more around instructions and possible penalties for not filing or maybe more detailed filing, because I remember that discussion coming up too, that I was scared of getting in trouble for anything. So if I bought a bunch of pizzas from Costco for volunteers, there's a receipt and it says pizzas from Costco, whereas others felt it was more appropriate to group items together and just say, you know, campaign supplies and put a total amount. And so I don't know what the clarity is on that, but yeah, not filing, that's definitely an issue. And then maybe providing more detail so that we don't have to question where money comes from or how it's being spent. I'm okay with reviewing
And I
those
agree
kind
with
of
you
items.
that the key there is disclosure.
Yeah.
And many people get a little bit careless because when they run, they don't keep records. They don't think it's important, but it is.
Well, and I mean, you could take another look at it. I think that all that's required is writing it down and turning it in.
Right.
But when I see disclosures that don't include a filing fee, it's like, well, how do they get on the ballot? And should that be a big deal or not? Or should all the voters or anybody who looks at it just think, oh, this guy is careless, doesn't know what he's doing. Maybe I don't want to elect him because he didn't include his filing fee or.
Now, I know at the state level, if you don't disclose timely a donation, there's a 10% penalty of the donation. And so, you know, I don't know if you want to match that with the state or do something like that. And then the question becomes, well, do you put a penalty on expenditures?
Yeah, and whose job is it to review and approve or disapprove? Well, we could open up a whole can of worms. Yeah, campaign finance department.
I think starting off with a penalty of some sort for not filing or not filing on time is a good place to start. At least for me.
Well, what kind of penalty? Do you want it to be financial? Do you want it to be, you can't run
I like
until you
having-
clear it up?
Yeah, I like an ineligibility type thing more so than penalizing somebody
Oh,
financially.
Because that's the penalty for the previous one, right? Is you're off the ballot. So I think the penalty for the later one would be you're off the ballot next time or next times. I don't think it's a big requirement. I mean, goodness, by now you've done it 3 times or 2 times, just do your last one.
What if they win?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I say you can't take office until.
No, yeah, I don't know that we can exclude them from
Yeah.
taking office, but we could still exclude them from running, right? So you can't run again next time, even though you won. That would be a real hardship for some people. I wish they'd filed their declaration.
Does state law have anything for that, Nicole?
Not that I'm aware of. I could do some research more into the state law, but as far as municipal campaign finance, there's really no repercussions for that last campaign finance statement as it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, what greater penalty can you apply than they lost?
Yeah, well,
I would say this is one that can be very sensitive and can, if not done properly, can cause a lot of problems. So I'm not going to be here, but I would say, take your time.
Yeah.
Thoroughly study it, compare it with other cities, with counties, with states, whatever you want to do, but approach it slowly. And if you do decide to do something, it might be wise to propose it and then maybe have a delayed effective date. So you give people a chance to give you feedback, candidates or something. Because there are a lot of unintended consequences. And being a CPA, actually, you create a lot of work for accountants and for attorneys. It's kind of like at the federal level. That's, if you're not careful, you can inadvertently break the law, but some of them do it deliberately.
And there's nothing wrong, as you know, with creating work for accountants and attorneys. One of the higher,
That's right. So,
And it's good guidance, Mayor. I mean, I don't think the intention is to, we definitely don't want to dissuade or create any kind of an atmosphere that feels like we're dissuading anyone to run or that there's a penalty to an inadvertent mistake. But we ask for it, it's on the books. How do we enforce that? Or how do we also don't want a system that allows people to skirt certain rules or certain, compliance with these things either. Yeah.
Is part of that, that maybe the instructions given to candidates are insufficient? I mean, we all got the or the booklet, the pages of information.
And Nicole's been awesome. This cycle's been great. I feel like there's
Yeah.
been a lot of information put out.
Speaking up on Nicole's behalf, in fact, I'm glad you asked that, Mayor, because I was gonna make kind of a comment complimenting Nicole. She takes very seriously and she takes a lot of time and pains with candidates when they come in. So
Yeah.
I'm sure there are always ways to improve communication, but it's hard for me to imagine something's not clear to candidates as to their requirements.
No, I
currently.
don't think so. And then she emails you and contacts you and says,
yeah.
hey, we're gonna
Yeah,
do
there's
this.
reminders. There's,
It's not Nicole's.
I don't know that
fault.
we could do
Oh, no,
anything
didn't
more
mean to imply that.
to make it
But,
easier,
What
but
I'm saying is maybe we need to, give additional instructions. I don't know, what's the cause? Why do people not file it?
Well, they don't want to. It's
Yeah.
bother, it's hassle. And maybe I didn't win anyway. Yeah.
I lost, I'm done.
I didn't win. I'm done.
I
I'm
don't
out.
need
I'm not
to
gonna
report
finish it.
anymore.
Well, maybe I guess it might work if you say you can't run again well, you can't run again. Maybe the thing to do is to say, you can't run again for that office until you file your final report.
Well, I would just say any municipal office, because if it's like, okay, I'm not running for District 2, but I'm going to run out large, I'm going to run for mayor. I mean, we only
Well,
have 7
Yeah, what I'm
offices.
saying is, it's just for this, for the city.
Well, we can't say for the legislature or something else, but school district, but just for us.
Just for, municipal.
I'm okay with that. Of course, I'm okay with a lot of things right now. So is there anything you want staff to do at this point?
I think a report that talks about what the state law requires
Mhm.
and maybe what some other cities are doing would be helpful.
And there was a specific request along those lines, Steve, just for summarizing again, the concern that you originally talked about at the beginning of this discussion was what?
Well, not filing your final report.
Okay, just the not filing of
Yeah,
it.
I mean, if
not-
you didn't file the penultimate report, you're off the ballot. What happens if you don't file the final? one?
Okay,
Now, I'm wondering, obviously, there have been final reports filed before. I'm not talking about this particular election, but 2 years ago, 4 years ago, maybe pick one of those and review them to highlight the problems. In other words, we maybe kind of a mini review or mini audit. You don't spend a lot of time, there's not that much there, but to say, here's the type of problems we found.
okay.
Well, you just pick the one that wasn't filed 2 years ago. That's,
Well,
And
if you're
that's the
going to
one.
do it, look at everything and say, what problems are noted? Is it clear that, people are not reporting everything? Seems to me there was a candidate and I know he spent some money, but his report showed little or nothing.
well, but that's a different question, Mayor. I mean, that's the question of, are we looking at their report and analyzing and say, we know you did more than that, or you didn't include this, or your math doesn't add up. I see a lot of those. But I haven't taken that step yet. I'm just saying, if you didn't file it at all,
Okay.
that's the easy step.
Yeah.
I think that should be the first step, and then maybe things will develop or need additional fleshing out, but I'm just saying, you ought to sign your name on a piece of paper and say, this is what I did, whether it's accurate or not.
Well, I'm happy for you to do more work since I won't be here to do it, so. But I'm comfortable with whatever you want to do. And if you want to do nothing, I'm comfortable with that too. I'm just trying to get where you want to be. So Why don't you summarize?
Well, I'm
for-
not gonna be around very long either, so it's
Yeah.
really up to if others want to carry this forward or they're okay.
Is, well, yeah, let's see. So are there 5 who would like, or at least 4 of you that want to? And what do you want
Yeah,
staff to
that
do?
approach that Lars had mentioned about some data gathering and present back, specifically in addressment of
Okay,
what happens if you don't file. that
you feel
last-
like you know what you need to do? Okay. And it seemed like there was enough to do this that, okay.
But to be honest with you, I think Nichols, you had done a great job. I've
Yes, I
been,
do too.
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Of course.
I've been running a few times in the past, but you know, the comparison, I think you have done a great job. I appreciate it very much, Nicole.
Thank you, Councilman.
Yeah, but you have to remember, when I do this, see, I'm as a CPA and they say 2 + 2 is 4, and I say, well, we can check that and verify it's true. Yeah. It may be true, but we want to make sure. We have to test it.
I can show you that 7 times 13 is 28, but I won't do it right now.
Isn't it?
It is. It's an old Abbott and Costello routine, but it works every time.
Okay. Well, we've handled that pretty well. Let's see. And if there's nothing else there, then council calendar. Any comments, question? Potential future agenda items.
We need to replace a council member. And
Okay, now normally that will take place after the first of the year. Is that correct?
We've done the research. We'll have the report in preparation for you and we'll bring it to you. Yep. But Nicole's actually completed all that. When did we look into that? A couple of weeks ago?
Yeah.
Something like that. So, yeah. And what is the proper? So right after the first of the year?
So we can begin noticing as soon as we'd like. We just basically post a notice that states that we have a vacancy and we're looking to fill that. After the vacancy occurs in the new year, we can begin accepting applications and we can designate the amount of time that we'd like to be able to do that. Once we receive applications, the council will interview candidates in a public meeting. It can be during one of our regular council meetings. We could schedule a special meeting. The code is pretty loose about how that works, but it does have to be public interviews, public can attend. Candidates have to meet all the qualifications, so live in the district, lived in the city for at least a year, registered voters, same as candidates who come in to apply.
It
I'd
has to
like
be
to-
filled within 30 days, right?
That's correct, yep. Has to be filled within 30 days of vacancy.
I think sooner is better than later and that we should do it at the earliest convenience and notice it as soon as we can.
Now, from the sounds of it, you can start the process, but you can't actually do the replacing until the position is vacant.
That's
Is that
correct.
right? Which would be the end of the year.
Then we have 30 days to fill that position.
That's correct, yep. So beginning when the day that the office becomes vacant, which is when the swearing in occurs. So 30 days from that date.
And I would suggest that we look at when we're gonna hold our strategic planning meeting also. After selection of the.
So we have a tentative date right now, the 21st and 22nd, I think, or was it 22nd and 23rd?
It is the 21st, the 22nd.
21st and 22nd, which is the third weekend is January. So if the council would like to talk about that now, you could either direct us to make sure the candidate selection or the unfilled position selection happens before that. Or you could say, hey, we'd like to have a little more time than that and push strategic plan out. Whichever you'd like.
So there's no impression that we're rushing this selection process. I'm in favor of pushing our strategic planning out to the 30 days. I mean, beyond that. Even if I mean, maybe
Well-
we don't get a ton of applicants, maybe the process shouldn't take that long, but I think just for the sake of, the impression that we're not trying to rush through the selection process, I would like to do that.
Well,
I agree
the
with
30
Jake.
days, was that the maximum or the minimum?
It's the maximum.
Maximum.
Yep.
Max.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think
so
we
you
go up to
can't go
30
more
days.
than that. You can do it in less. You can do it in 15 days.
We could, but I think it just gives a better impression that we take the full time to not rush the process.
Yeah, give them an elbow room so they can, if something snap or whatever, can take care of that.
But if we start the notice right away,
Then
then,
they
then,
know.
then,
Oh,
then
I
we're,
think
then we have this process
I think we should be.
that's taken, and that, it shouldn't be any problem to fill the position
Well,
before our
now,
strategic plan meeting in the
30-day
third week of
notice is from
January.
the day it's actually vacant. So
Correct.
you can actually do the notice 60 days ahead of time.
And I
So,
like that.
yes,
We should. be
and so you could do
entertaining
that
applications.
now, for that matter. And the more time you give people to decide that,
Yeah, you could notice up and say you're gonna interview on the 10th of January, you're gonna make a selection on the 15th of January and whatever. Just so long, there's plenty of, I mean, there really isn't, Jake, the time that we need is from opening up applications or giving notice to when the selection is made, not so much selection to strategic plan or seating or anything.
That's true. I'm just thinking about conversations with my neighbors or someone else who say like, well, you guys had 30 days, but it only took 10
Well,
because that's
yeah,
your
well, so
friend
we
that
did-
applied, or you know what I mean?
Well,
So,
No, I agree.
yeah.
but,
if
but
we
if
start
you do
now-
the noticing,
Oh, yeah, I'm all for that.
then
Let's
I
open
think-
the application as soon as
Yeah.
possible.
Well, and we've all been pretty mindful of everybody's scheduling strategic plan and not knowing that person's schedule. It's kind of tough to say, oh, yeah, you were okayed on Tuesday and you need to be at this meeting on Friday. And your work schedule may not accommodate that, so.
Yeah.
I think almost having it in February makes more sense.
unless you get an old geezer like me that's retired, then they can do anything.
Could
they
do.
want.
We can put out an application, only old geezers.
Must be geezer.
Yeah.
Well, and I would say, I have no role to play in that, obviously, not going to be here. So maybe if you would coordinate with those members of the council who will be.
How bad does that set you folks back if we did it the first week of February versus the third week of January?
It's not a problem.
Okay.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, I'm fine with whatever time you set it.
Okay.
That gives them another week to do their strategic plan presentation.
Yeah. Get everything ready. Okay, I just have one item. We had kind of a situation in my neighborhood this weekend and people, so I live north of 35 and east of 48th. No one that I've talked to in that neighborhood got the reverse 911 shelter in place, even though they heard everything going on. But people that live across the street to the south and the west got the 911. Can we just do a little bit of research or what the criteria is if we need to have something that people can put in contact information and if it only goes to landlines or just how that process kind of is?
Yeah, after I inquired and after I sent the council an email, and then even after that, spoken with the police chief about just getting some more information from the
Yeah.
director of VAC as to exactly how that works. So,
Okay.
yeah, we can do that.
Okay, thank you.
The others, I have
One.
one, but
Yeah, I'd like to request a communication and discussion about ranked choice voting, just because a lot of our neighboring municipalities just went through that. I'd love to see what some of their initial reactions or what worked and didn't work, and just so we can start looking at that.
there was quite I guess, a review or study done of that.
Yeah, there was.
It was just in the news.
I'm sure, yeah.
Yeah, about, they took surveys of the 21 cities.
Sure.
Yeah, I'd be glad to do that. Already asked Nicole to do it. We're already checking out 4 or 5 of the cities here in the county who did it, just to see what
Awesome.
their,
And you're
exactly that. What were the pros? What were the problems? We've already heard, which I won't give any spoilers, but we've already heard about some unexpected issues that we didn't even think about.
Yeah.
So it's pretty interesting.
cool. And then another one that you're probably already working on also, but with the new, census updates and those type of things, I know a lot of us don't have any appetite for talking about boundaries and districts and things like that right now. But given the growth of the city and maybe disproportionate growth based on our census updates that'll continue coming, would love to talk about our city council districts and whether or not we have enough or whether we're good or not. And maybe the population hasn't grown enough that should be a point, but I'd like to know
So I'm
if that's.
3 for 3 here, which is good because I was 0 for 3 when Mayor back at about 3:30. But yeah, Nicole and I've already talked about that too. There's a process in place which you guys will be seeing happen here in roughly 6 months.
Beautiful. That's great. Thank
So,
you.
but we wouldn't change how many districts we have
No,
because we would have to change our government,
right.
Correct.
and our form of government is not,
Right.
Right.
That's why I said there's no appetite for lines and
Yeah.
boundaries. I'm just interested in.
Boundaries
growth.
will change
Right.
naturally,
Yeah, we
but
have
it'll
to
be
do that.
because of distribution of the population.
Correct.
not really
And that's
anything
what
more
I'm-
than that.
Yeah.
Would be cool to know more about.
Yeah. Yeah, so I can't even remember, Nicole, when we said, did we have like a specific date or did we
So
just
the
sort of generally say like
legislature-
6 months-ish?
The legislature will do a review in December, and once we get the final numbers from then, we'll start looking at internally within the city, and we do have 6 months from that time to establish new boundaries if needed.
Cool.
Most likely.
Thank you. That's it from me.
Okay, the one I have is, as I mentioned a little earlier in the meeting, was this parking issue. I would like to recommend that we do that, but I would like to be involved in that discussion. So is it okay if we do that soon? Anyone opposed to that? I'd like to participate in that discussion. Because there are some issues. This parking thing is kind of interesting, and I'll just highlight one problem. Parking on the street on snow days. You say, well, we have a prohibition against that, but in many areas of the city, if people can't park on the street, they can't park at their house, period. Or unless they park several blocks away. It's just kind of an interesting dynamic of that, because I have a home in my neighborhood where they have a dozen cars there at that house. So if we say to them, you can't park on the street, well, they can't park on someone else's property. So where do they park? Do they have to go to a hotel room? Anyway, I'd like to just look at that overall and develop, re-examine our philosophy and say, how many. I will tell you candidly that nationally, there's a lot of push to eliminate parking, even in business parking lots. And the Salt Lake County had one of those, and that was about 2 years ago that I went to. And I say, it doesn't quite make sense, but let's look at what makes sense for West Valley. So if we could kind of put that on the agenda for soon.
Okay, so as I heard that, so what I would end up bringing back, and we want to do it on a short time frame because you want to be involved. So basically, what I would envision doing is just bringing back our last parking discussion, which looked at it from a overall standpoint. I'm sure Steve Pastrick probably has that in his suit coat pocket because of the number of times we've done that. But yeah, that would be
He left
pretty,
it in these others.
right. So, but given all that, yeah, that's pretty easy for us to do. So we
Okay.
can do that in the
But
next little bit.
we say any issue you want to bring up with parking, feel free to do so, or if you want to talk with Wayne directly, do so. Anything else there? Council reports. Oh, we still got 5 minutes. Ron?
I'll make mine quick. Western Growth Committee Coalition met yesterday. There were 3 legislators there and they each talked about their priorities during this legislative time. Rather than try to explain everything that they had, I'll just send my notes to Nicole and she can put them out to us and go from there. One of the things they did mention though, was they got questioned on how the federal monies will be spent. All of this money that's coming down and just signed in and everything. And I thought Senator Maine had a good response for it. She said, we all have appropriations ready for the money and they exceed the amount of the money that we'll get. So what they were saying was, if we've got some necessities locally, we need to get those into the priority system now so that when we start distributing that money, we'll be on the list.
Already done.
And I figured it was.
4 for 4.
4 for 4, man.
4 for 4 tonight.
Okay, and then they talked about redistricting, which was, we're discussing history now. We can't do anything about it, so.
Oh, people get really upset and it doesn't change much. The only ones who get concerned about it are elected officials. The general public, until I got involved in politics, I didn't care which congressional district I was in.
Or no.
Or did I know?
Yeah. That's like saying, well, you're shopping in a different city. That's the law. Anyway, I would mention one thing just for your information. Because our police department, we have several members there who've been very much involved in that. A catalytic converter bill
Yeah,
will be heard in committee tomorrow.
and they're hoping to make it a committee bill.
Yes. And many of the issues that our officers brought up are included in the bill. And we've tried to keep those there for them. So just kind of a note. Appreciate the support of our law enforcement in that, not just West Valley, others have participated too. But our officers have been very, very helpful in that. Appreciate it. Anything else? There's no need for a closed session.
I have a comment.
Yes, go ahead.
It's not a report, but a comment. You guys, we are talking about the campaign today, so I just want to share with you guys one thing I'm thinking about. Want to share with you. You see that last campaign, we spent our time, efforts, money, and sweat. Some is talking to their friends and customers, others make a lot of phone calls. So I'm knocking the doors, every single doors. And even mayor, he shared with me, he packed his lunch in his car and knocking people's doors. I think it's incredible. I haven't done that yet, but incredible. So I just want to actually prefer to use the word the council instead of the board. The member of the board, basically very much is just not quite a process like we're doing right now. We're running for the council board, just an application and also just an interview, and you can get the member, become a member. But here's a quite a process, and it's involved a lot. It's sometimes frustrating and sweating. So I would love to hear that from every one of us and staff and council members. We need to use the word council instead of the board member.
In fact, we'll be talking about that some in our next meeting, so I'll probably have a few comments. Okay, one of my last chances, so. With that, then, anything else? If not, we are done.
Move to adjourn.
Without objection, we are adjourned. Hearing no objections, it's unanimous.